Hello, everyone. This is World Review with Ivo Daalder, a weekly look at news from around the world. Each week, I sit down with leading journalists and experts to break down what's happening in the world, why it matters, and what comes next. Today, it's Friday, February 20, and here is what is on tap this week. As we tape this, we appear to be on the brink of war with Iran. The U.S. has marshaled the largest naval and air force in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq, though ground forces necessary for an invasion are notably lacking. Iran is ready for war, putting the world on notice that U.S. bases and facilities around the world are all fair game in the case the U.S. strikes first. Trump has made clear that there either will be a deal or there will be major consequences. But what no one seems to know is what such a deal might entail. So are we playing a game of chicken, or will this inevitably end up in a major military confrontation? Next, we'll take a look at Syria, where the U.S. announced it was removing its troops that were deployed to combat the ISIS more than a decade ago. The government led by Ahmed al-Sharaa has now taken control of the entire country, or at least that's how it seems. And the Kurdish Syrian democratic forces that have controlled much of northern Syria for the past decade have now consolidated with the government in Damascus. But will this arrangement last? And what happens to ISIS, many of whose leaders escaped detention centers long controlled by the SDF? And finally, MAGA apparently glows global, or at least European. In Munich last Saturday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio once again called on Europe to embrace the white Christian nationalist version of Western civilization that much of the European far right embraces. He then traveled to Hungary, where he said that Viktor Orban's remaining in power was, quote, a vital national interest of the United States. This, of course, despite the fact that Orban's opponent is leading in the polls for the elections that are coming in April. To address all of these issues and questions, I'm joined by three reporters who cover these stories. Liz Sly is a British journalist who has covered the world for the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, and other outlets. She was Baghdad bureau chief for the Post in 2010 and then reported on Syria for almost a decade from Beirut. Hey, Liz, great to have you on.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Bobby Ghosh is an Indian-American journalist who has written for Bloomberg, Times, CNN, The Times of India about food, football, and foreign policy. Three loves we share. Hey, Bobby, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Last but certainly not least, Matt Kaminski is a Polish-born American editor, journalist, and media executive. He was the co-founder of Political Europe, former editor-in-chief of Politico, a foreign correspondent, an opinion writer, and editor at the Wall Street Journal, and today he is the editorial chair of the Middle East Broadcast Networks. Matt, great to have you back on the show.
Great to be here, Ivo.
Before we dig in, let's talk about the news that just announced. The Supreme Court has struck down the tariffs that President Trump had imposed back on, quote, Liberation Day on April 2nd, when he said there was a national emergency and the Congress had allowed him to now do whatever he wanted, including using tariffs as a way to raise revenue, as a way to get countries to sign new trade deals, as a way to get them to change foreign policy. So now that the court has struck this down, which really is a centerpiece of Trump's foreign and economic policy, what do we think the foreign policy and trade impact will be? Matt, let me start with you. You're a close observer of all of this. How are you looking at this?
I think, first of all, to our foreign friends who keep asking, are there checks and balances still in the U.S. system? This is an answer, absolutely. It was a 6-3 decision, which is also very important. That was critical for Chief Justice Roberts, that it didn't kind of fall along liberal, moderate. It actually, you had Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett joining him in this decision. And it's a slapback in terms of, there are limits to executive power in this country, and they are being and are reminders of it. I think longer term, who knows? I mean, there's sort of a belief among some people this could actually be a win for Trump if it saves him from economic idiocy, because it does seem like we're seeing the tariffs really hit with inflation. The laws of physics and the laws of economics haven't actually changed in the Trump era. So undoing it may end up probably being good for the country, both politically and economically, but maybe for him.
Liz, how do you see it? Of course, Britain is enthralled with a different story about its former prince. But when we go and talk about what's going on, Britain was the first to sign an agreement with the United States. Probably still has the lowest tariffs of any other country. But more generally, how do you think this is going to play out in Britain, but in Europe and the rest of the world as they look at? I think Matt's exactly right. The balance of power being slightly restored, at least for a moment, in the United States, and a real slap back to the president.
Well, yes, I mean, it's really, I think the reaction is muted because nobody knows quite what this means, just as we didn't really know what tariffs in the first place would mean. Looking at it from Britain's perspective, but I think this is a perspective that applies to a lot of other countries around the world as well, the ones who have done deals with the Trump administration. Those deals now unravel. Those deals have involved, I mean, Trump had some right on his side when he said that, other countries have tariffs, so we're going to give them tariffs. Some of those tariffs on American products have now been lifted in order to preserve some access or reduce the tariffs on domestic products. This is the case in the UK. It's just been a big pharmaceutical deal, which a lot of British people are very suspicious about because it could bring expensive American products into the NHS, which has big budget problems at the moment and strict quality controls. And a lot of the reasons why that never happened before the tariffs or decades of trade talk is because of different standards and everything like that. But there's a deal. The Keir Starmer government allowed these products in. Will everybody just say, right, okay, we're going to stop your medicines again now, and we're going to put back up your tariffs that you put on us, that we had on you, and or do these new deals survive? But America doesn't have to. American consumers don't have to pay for the imports that they're getting through these tariffs. I think it's a big mystery, and we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I think, Liz, you're right. It's very early and to comment, but I think there is this question whether this big hammer that has been hanging over international politics, Bobby, and the way the Trump administration has conducted foreign policy, whether that hammer is now a little less severe, that there's an ability to say, which the Chinese have done and the Indians to some extent, but the Chinese really said, we don't care about the hammer. We're going to do whatever we want. Does it allow people to say maybe Trump has less leverage now than he did?
Yeah, going forward, but as Liz pointed out, those who've already made those deals have made those deals. I think it would be hard for them to walk away from it without arousing the anger of Donald Trump. And we've seen that when he gets angry, he can do rash and foolish things. The States has many ways of hurting countries. Tariffs were one of them, but that's not the only one. If I were the head of a country that had already made a deal with the United States, I would be asking myself, maybe we should have waited. But at the time, it seemed to have been the right call to make for Britain, for India, for European countries, for Mexico and others. I think they'll also be watching much more the political fallout of this in the United States, because, of course, the topic that we're going to come to next, the prospects of war in Iran, might be affected by this. If Trump has had a bad day, it's not just that the Supreme Court has slapped him back on the centerpiece of his economic policy, the policy that he has sort of attached a lot of his personal prestige to. But then there's also the news that of inflation, and the economy is not doing very well. That's a bad combination for the president. And there's also, of course, the news out of from where Liz is in Britain. The arrest of Prince Andrew is a reminder of the Epstein scandal and the fact that nobody comparable has been arrested in the United States. These are very, very bad things for the president. The president, dare I say it, desperately needs a distraction.
Distraction or even a win. Just the one issue on these trade deals that have been negotiated. very few of those have actually been formalized in an agreement, including in the case of the European Union. There's this sort of an understanding, but the formalization hasn't really happened. Same is true, if I'm right, with much of Britain. I think these deals are deals that the president proclaims and people are willing to adhere to, but now that there's less leverage, it might be falling apart. We'll have to watch all of this. Let's get sort of to our main issue, Bobby Ghosh. As you mentioned, Iran, the newspapers and the television and everything else was full over the last 24 hours about this huge armada that seems to be ready this weekend, and everybody that I know of seems to be expecting military action this week, because you don't assemble a force this large unless you're planning to use it. How do you look at it? And if so, what are we trying to do here?
Well, the two different questions. The latter is the harder one. What are we trying to do here? The assembling of that great armada there. We've seen this movie before, and fairly recently in Venezuela. And I remember in these conversations leading up to the events there, I used this analogy a few times, and I'm going to uncork it once more, which is it's an analogy from theater. It's said about, I think, specifically Chekhov plays, but plays in general, that if there is a revolver on the mantelpiece in the first act, then it follows that by the third act the revolver will be used. That is a rule of theater, and if you assemble that much military hardware off the shores of a country, there is a very, very high probability, if not certainty, that you will use it. And in Venezuela, we saw Trump use it, not to the extent that people feared, but I worry that the fact that he used it and, to his mind, got away with a win, again, to his mind only, gives him a sense that he can do it again. He's already bombed Iran, or he's participated in the bombing of Iran last year during the Israeli-Iranian war, and got away with that too, without a great deal of retaliation. So that's twice he has used the military option and got away with it. And the one thing we know about this president is that if he feels like he can get away with something, then he will do it. He has certainly assembled the force required to bomb Iran. There does not seem to be any intention to follow that up with an invasion, as you pointed out in your introduction, that there are no ground troops that are being amassed. But he likes to be able to conduct war without actually putting American boots on the ground and American lives at risk. And so I would not rule it out. This could be a gigantic bluff designed to bring the Iranians to the negotiating table. The Iranians, even this morning, AFP is reporting, I noticed that the Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi has said that in a couple of days they will have an outline of a nuclear deal. The Iranians are playing their part in this game, and we should hope that it does not come to war. But can we realistically rule this out? If we've learned anything in the past year, the answer is no, we can't.
I think that is the right question. But Liz, you know the region, and other than Israel, it doesn't seem that anybody in the region is particularly enthusiastic about this. There are reports that the Saudis and the UAE have already said, you can't use our forces, you can't use our airspace, which is why most of the air power is now in Jordan. And so, how as someone who's long looked at this region, how do you look at what's happening, and how do you think this is likely to play out from a regional perspective?
The rapprochement between the Gulf states and Iran actually goes back to 2019, 2020, and the attack on the Saudi oil facility, and the Trump administration's failure to respond to that on behalf of Saudi Arabia made the Saudis, the UAE, all of them re-established diplomatic relations with Iran. And they started saying quietly back then, we will not allow American bases on our soil to be used against Iran. We don't want to get involved. They were distancing themselves from Iran to prevent any further attacks on them. and they've stepped aside from this conflict. I think it's also fair to say that Iran does not have any friends in this conflict. Nobody is with it. Iraq, to a certain extent, because it's got a Shia government, but the Iraqis' attitude is also just keep us out of it. Do what you want over our heads. We want nothing to do with it. They've said they don't want their airspace to be used, and they've said they will take all available measures not to have their, not to allow their airspace to be used. But that's almost like a bit of a joke. They have no measures. They have no air force. They have no defenses. Iran's not going to have any friends either. I think a big concern of this is that it's actually, just as Bobby feels that the Trump will bomb Iran if he can get away with it. I think the Iranians will resist any deal if they can get away with it. And for years and years and years now, they've been resisting any deal. Pressure isn't going to work. I don't see the Iranians bowing to that pressure. We've basically had a destabilizing and unstable Middle East since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. These guys were raised in violence, raised in blood, but raised in revolution. They're ready to fight. Trump seems to think that he can get away, if he can do it, if he can get away with it, he will. He seems to have no constraints as long as he's confident or believes something will work. So I don't see it ending well, but I don't see I don't see any good outcome whether you go to war or not, And from the regional perspective, I just think most people are going to keep us out of it. We want nothing to do with it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. The question is, can they be kept out of it? Because, of course, there are American bases in countries that don't want to be a part of this war, and the Iranians have made very clear those are targets and they're legitimate. But Matt, one of the things missing in the conversations, not that we're having, but the conversation that is being had is, why are we even in this position? I mean, the nuclear program was supposed to have been obliterated. The president actually said again that it was gone. So what are we trying to do on the nuclear side? And the president wanted to help the protesters. Well, they were killed. Military force is not likely to be a particularly good way to do it. Lindsey Graham announced in Munich Security Conference that we'll have regime change in a week. Well, that'd be interesting to see, even if the Ayatollah himself won't be able to survive. The regime is likely to survive, which is well bigger than the Ayatollah. When you look at this, why aren't we having a serious discussion about how do we get into a position where the question is, who's going to lose face, Trump or the Iranians, when neither side really knows what the other wants?
Well, I would push back a little bit on the kind of he's just doing things that he can get away with narrative. I think there's a reading of Trump. It's very fashionable to say Trump has no strategy, and I actually probably agree with that to some degree. But if you look out a little bit more, there is a clear vision for at least what the administration is doing as opposed to what Donald Trump is doing. And that is, to quote Lindsey Graham in Munich, he was saying, by the end of the year, Trump wants to significantly remake the Western Hemisphere. He started that with Venezuela by decapitating a pro-Chinese, pro-Russian, pro-Iranian regime that happens to have half of Saudi Arabia's oil riches and an hour from Miami, and that is the one path. Second path is the push in Europe, whether it's to force the Europeans to be strong as well, and to kind of take responsibility for their own security. And the third path is in the Middle East, and that is to remake the region in a very kind of grand way. And by the way, I'm a 79-year-old president, and even though I may joke about re-election, I am going to be done in 3 years, and I want to leave something behind. And that behind would be in the region. I started with the Abraham Accords with the Emiratis, with the Moroccans 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, almost. And now the next step is to solve the Iran problem. I was actually in the region about a week and a half ago. I spent a week in the Emirates and talked to a lot of people in their system, and they were convinced that something kinetic was going to happen. They were terrified of the immediate consequences, but they were also aware that America's in the driver's seat in the Middle East now, and they have to make the best of it. I think as far as the what is the tactical approach, it was interesting this week. that on Wednesday night, it seemed like he was going to go for it. He was briefing the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. It's happening this weekend. I heard of people who canceled their plans for the weekend because this is going to go down. And then something changed on Thursday where he gave them this 10-day ultimatum. But it seemed like there was a reverse course, and the people who canceled their plans this weekend are actually regret canceling them because nothing's going to happen. So, it's not clear that Trump is himself committed to a course of action. But the course that I think they had laid out for weeks now is we're going to roll the dice. We're going to strike once. We're going to try and see what happens if you kind of shake things in Iran. Then we might follow up with an economic blockade of Iran, and we'll see if we can kind of wait them out. The regime, and primarily its nearly 87-year-old supreme leader, Khamenei, is saying, well, we're going to try and see if we can wait them out. We kind of survived the 12-day war. Let's see if we can survive this thing. And the key question for this U.S., if this is truly the U.S. strategy, is it Khamenei? Is it an 87-year-old man problem that he is committed to the revolution and to things as they are? And in fact, under him, there are layers of pragmatists who say, hey, you strike some deal, you'll be better off, your families will be better off, you can unlock this oil wealth, and 10 years from now, you have an economy 3 times the size of Turkey, and you're a sort of serious player in the Middle East. And I think, and I'm sure, by the way, that there, among the bluster from both sides, there are definitely conversations that the CIA is having with the mayor of Tehran or other people in there about trying to kind of chart the path for this. Are you going to die on the hill of this old guy, or is there something going forward? So I do think there is more of there's more serious thinking that I've picked up on about what this looks like playing out. And then it leads to, another Abraham Accords between the Saudis and the Israelis. And you can't accuse Trump of not thinking big. You may not like the where this leads, but there is a kind of a vision that I can at least divine in talking to people in the administration and in the region.
There's certainly people in the administration who are thinking that way. Whether Donald Trump is or not has always been one of the issues. Just one issue, Bobby, as another close observer of this part of the world. I mean, my sense has always been that, yes, the supreme leader is incredibly important from an ideological and sort of a figurehead and is a strong leader. But the real power lies with the IRGC. And the IRGC has actually done quite well under this regime, including under the economic sanctions of this regime. And that even if you find a way to get rid of the leader, the likelihood of this of a Haiti or of the regime falling apart, people getting to the street, as opposed to the IRG just taking over, as by the way is exactly what happened in Venezuela. Same guys are in power now, except for Maduro. How do you see this playing out? Is there a possible positive outcome here?
I think Trump would take that as a positive outcome if the IRGC were left in charge and Khamenei were gone. He took that deal in Venezuela. I think he would take that deal in Iran in a heartbeat, and he would say, "This is a lot better than the JCPOA. This is the greatest deal ever made in the entire history of time, not since Cyrus and the ancient Persians has a deal like this been made, and I'm the one who did it, and I'm going to call it the Trump peace deal, and then walk off stage right, to the applause of his sycophants. He would take that deal. I think he would take that deal. I mean, they are counting, as Matt says, they are counting on people senior enough in the regime who might be attracted to the idea of making more money. Retain the corrupt regime, get rid of the old man, and make a lot of money by making, by then, you create a Russia style, you have oligarchs who are running the oil infrastructure. You have former military people who are billionaires. That's a deal that I think the Trump administration would take. Would that make the Middle East a safer place? Just possibly, but that's a big leap. I think yes, the IRGC generals are crucial in this, but these are people who grew up after the for the most part after the revolution, people in their 60s who were blooded in the Iran-Iraq war, who've seen the events that have taken place in the Middle East, especially the fall of Saddam Hussein and more recently the fall of Bashar Assad. They've seen these things play out from a very different perspective of anybody in this conversation, and they attach a very different color to these events. So I would hesitate to put myself in their shoes, but that is what the administration is counting on: that greed and a chance to survive and thrive in the post Khamenei landscape. That is the sort of thing that many senior generals in the IRGC will go for.
That may be true, but I think that's also I think what's really remarkable about Iran is, one, how young and how secular that society now is, and the hatred for the IRGC, which goes across Iranian society. And I guess they would say, the changed status quo is better than the status quo, similarly to Venezuela. And I think Venezuela, the test is not now, the test is a year from now, is if the old Maduro Chavez clique is still really running the show, then it's been a failure. But let's see where we are here. I think similarly with Iran, if Khamenei does fall, you want something which is a transitional path, but hopefully the end result is something which reflects what Iranian society is now. Iranian society is not in revolutionary mood. It's actually very pro-American, very youthful, very non-Islamic sort of state of mind.
I don't believe the IRGC would go for such a deal. And if the Trump administration thinks it can pull such a deal, the IRGC wouldn't be the IRGC if it didn't shout death to America at every available opportunity and mean it. I think that's a non-starter, really.
That's Liz Sly, who has for a long time reported from the Middle East. We're also joined by Bobby Ghosh, who writes about food and football and foreign policy. But today we're only talking about foreign policy. And Matt Kaminski, formerly of Politico and now editorial chair of the Middle East Broadcast Networks. Great to have this conversation. And I actually wanted to take this what happens after a regime changes, Liz, is a good transition to talk about Syria, something that on the show we haven't done enough because a lot has changed in Syria. You've probably studied and know this place a lot better than almost anywhere else. It's remarkable that, relative to everything that is happening over the last year or so, the level of violence has been, it's not zero, but it is life is improving for people. The last remaining part of Syria that was not controlled by the government in Damascus is now under the control of the government of Damascus. Just help us understand where we are, how we got there, but more importantly, sort of how you see this evolving. Is there a viability of a state actually emerging as stable Syria, not itself a problem for the region and not being tested by outside forces?
Yes, it's extraordinary what's happened in Syria this year, just since January. I was actually there last month on a quick visit, and then everything changed in the day after I left. Syria, the central government in Syria has not controlled all of its territory since 2012. Since 2012, when they began to lose territory to the rebels. The Syrian state now controls pretty much all of Syrian territory, except for some little bits that the Israelis occupy in the south, newly occupied since the fall of Assad. That is an issue that's not gone away, and it's not going to go away. But I would like to think that the deal with the Kurds. I'll back up here and just say yes. The central government has taken over effectively, de facto, all of the Kurdish areas. The deal is being implemented over the next 2 months, but at the end of this, the central government will control all of the areas that had been occupied by the Kurdish forces, which were created and built up by the Americans, the SDF part of that, the Arab component of that. Those forces crumbled with the launch of a government offensive. The SDF basically crumbled. What remains now is the Kurdish component of the SDF, which is the YPG, and they have a few Kurdish strongholds in the northeast that they've been trying to hold out for. But they have now agreed to integrate into the Syrian army, have the state control all the areas, and the very few towns and areas that are purely Kurdish, they are going to have local security control over that, so they won't have to have like Arabs who they don't trust coming in and policing their areas. But this is really happened in a very positive way. There have been reports of killings on either side, but there hasn't been any mass killings. There hasn't been any real bloodshed on the scale of like what we saw in the coast against the Alawites about a year ago. And now the US troops are leaving because there really isn't a reason for them to stay anymore. I think a big question mark is will the last very hardcore YPG Kurdish holdouts allow the government troops to approach their areas? That will play out over the next couple of months. And of course, what will happen to ISIS? Because for more than a decade now, we've been saying, oh, ISIS could come back. Camps are a big problem. We've got, somebody's got to do something about the camps. We've left the Kurds in control of the camps and nobody's doing anything about them. Well, nobody did anything about them, and boof, the Kurds left and the new government's taken over. And some of the ISIS escaped. Some of the Americans managed to ferry some of them to Iraq, where they could, probably be executed, because that's what happens when they send people to Iraq. But some did get away, and some will be reintegrated into society because some of them probably shouldn't have been in prison in the first place. And will ISIS come back? Well, it's been a question that we wrote so many stories saying ISIS could come back. ISIS is attacking more. They haven't come back yet. A good time for them to come back would have been after Assad fell a year ago. They didn't come back. A good time for them to come back would be right now, with everything a bit chaotic and a transition of power. It's not happening yet. Let's keep our fingers crossed it doesn't happen at all.
So, I mean, Matt, the story that Liz tells us is a really important story. It's to some extent, other than the close Syria watch, it's not a story we see every day. The president made a big bet on al-Sarraj being able to do this. He lifted sanctions. He did what the Saudis wanted. He's now pulling out troops. He's had his own envoy trying to help and negotiate, and should he get a lot more credit than in fact is generally recognized, or even importantly he's claiming?
Well, I think there's three things that kind of strike me, both from Washington, but from the time that I now spend often in the region. One, al-Sarraj is a very gifted politician. He has gone to Washington. He's sweet-talked Trump. There was a quiet meeting, but he got in the Oval. But more importantly, he's been very good on Capitol Hill and getting congressmen up there to say, okay, we're willing to lift the sanctions because we trust you, even though 5 years ago you were on, the most wanted list for ISIS. And he's such a fascinating character. He grew up in a left-wing family, Damascus sort of intelligentsia, really, or Syrian intelligentsia, left wing, and kind of moved over to now he's trying to lead the country. And it's also remarkable how challenging this is for him. This is not a country. This is a scarred country. This is not a real country right now. He's trying to. The second thing you get reminded of being in the region, they really all don't like each other. The Emiratis can't stand the Saudis. Saudis can't stand the Emiratis and the Qataris. No one really trusts the Syrians, especially in the Gulf. This is more in the Arab world, and there's a lot of reluctance to support him. He isn't. He's being feted in Washington. I don't think he's been to Abu Dhabi, and I can't remember last time he was in Riyadh. He's not getting the support because he represents that Muslim Brotherhood strain, and they really fear that. The third thing is the rise of Turkey. And how Turkey is trying to, hey, this is Ottoman Redux, we're sort of back in the game. We're going to send troops to Gaza. We're going to help in Syria. And guess who doesn't like this very much, which is the other country which has benefited the most from since October 7th, which is Israel in terms of its regional influence. And Israel is also very Shara skeptical, Syria skeptical. And so it's such an important story we started off talking about, trying to remake the region. Is this the decade it's going to happen? Syria is certainly a key to that. And if anyone tells you they know how this is going to turn out, I mean, they're foolish.
So, Bobby, how's it going to turn out?
Let me tell you all. No, I second that motion. I wouldn't dare predict. I would not have predicted Shara. So why would I predict how this goes? I would only say this, that there are better chances now than there were 2 years ago. There are better. There's some hope of a good outcome now that did not exist 2 years ago. I don't think we've heard the last of the Kurds. Their underlying aspiration to be a separate people, a separate nation. I don't think we've heard the last of that. I think Shara is going to need to show a great deal of flexibility in his dealings with them. He's shown some so far, and maybe he does more of that. But he's going to need to show more of that. And then the Kurds are going to have to show that they believe him. They've heard various kinds of promises. They've seen how the Kurds in other parts of the region, the experiences of those Kurds in Iraq, Kurds in Iran. So they will learn from all of those things. I think the glass half full is that this could work out, and I would not have thought that possible until very, very recently. The glass half empty is that it's going to take a great deal more political work before it works out.
So interesting, I think, importantly, that you brought the Kurds back in here, because, of course, the Kurds also made a deal with Erdogan and ended the military part of their effort. And yet I keep on thinking about, what was it? Was it Henry Kissinger who sold them down the line? And the Kurds are they are always sold down the barrel at the end, and somehow they always come back. And so I do wonder. And Liz, just a last comment from you. I mean, the Kurds had a good, a lot of control of a lot of territory about up there in the north, the northeast of Syria. They're now giving it up. You rightly, I think, pointed out that some of the Kurdish held territory will be policed by Kurds themselves, etc. But they can't be happy about what's happening here.
Well, I'll try to be brief if we're going to go into intra-Kurdish issues here, but the Kurds are not a monolith. And the particular Kurds that the US was helping are based in Kandil Mountains in Iraq, and they're predominantly Turkish Kurds. And they had a Turkish branch, and that branch had fairly good relations with Assad, and then got elevated to a position where they were dominant in northeast Syria, the point that ISIS emerged and the Americans came into the picture, and the Americans supported. When I started going to that area over 10 years ago, 12, 13, 14 years ago, Syrian Kurds aren't naturally supporters of that wing of the Kurdish party, of the Kurdish nation, if you like. They're much more pro. There's a lot of support for Barzani, who's more moderate, he's more tribal. It's more in keeping with the Kurdish culture in Syria, is more akin to the Kurdish culture across the border in Iraq than maybe with Turkey or something else. And they weren't particular fans of this group that was in control with ISIS. And another point to make is that of the area that the Americans helped the Kurds control, which amounted to a third of Syria, the overwhelming majority of those areas were overwhelmingly Arabs. The Kurds weren't even a significant minority. They took those areas by conquest. It was insane to think they could ever keep those areas, because the Arabs were beginning to fester a little bit after a decade of rule under Kurds, and especially after they could see Arabs they liked taking control in Damascus. Why are we now being ruled by these Kurds? So that's why the SDF basically crumbled. It's a bit of a fiction. It was built for a specific task, which was to defeat ISIS. And with that task gone, they were just in a holding pattern until a new arrangement came along. Under the deal, all the Kurds who were from Kandil and from the PKK branch, which the YPG is the Syrian branch of the PKK, they are all supposed to return to Kandil, and I gather that has been happening. And pictures of Barzani have been going up around the actual Kurdish areas that are majority Kurds. I think we're going to see a big shift in the politics of the Kurds as well. And yes, it's all changing Syria. And I think that, I really think there is hope. And I would give some credit to Trump for being bold enough to take a bet on a jihadi in a country that's been so unstable for so long and desperately needs a break and a lifeline. And it did get that from Trump.
Well, maybe he needs the Nobel Peace Prize for what he's trying to do in Syria. But I'm sure after the president listens to the conversation, that will be the next talking point. We're joined here with Liz Sly, Bobby Ghosh, and Matt Kaminski for our conversation about this week here on World Review. Finally, Matt, let me turn to you. You're a great student of Europe, although now you're a great student of the Middle East. In fact, you're a great student of a lot of places, but you know Europe extraordinarily well. Having emerged from there and reported from there for so long. A lot of Munich was about the U.S.-European relationship, and we talked about that last week on the show. What happened afterwards was kind of interesting. Marco Rubio, who doesn't, as Secretary of State, hasn't spent a lot of time going to Europe, came to Munich and then went to Slovakia and to Hungary. At the same time, his State Department is moving forward with a new website, freedom.gov, that allows Europeans who are being censored to access to the kind of information that is being censored by Europeans. There is this movement. There's been talk also of U.S. State Department funding right-wing think tanks in Europe. There's this idea that there's now what do we call it? A MAGA internationale? Could we call it that? That the kind of ideological view that persists within the Trump administration, particularly by the vice president and to some extent now Marco Rubio as well, is being exported in some way, and that's certainly, when I talk to Europeans, a huge fear in Europe that the wrong political parties are getting support from the United States. That's what happened in the Vance speech when he supported the AfD, the alternative to Germany, 6 days prior to the elections there. So how do you look at what is happening here? Is this just a bunch of incoherent or even coherent ways of moving forward, or is this a real strategy to try to change European politics?
I think, Ivo, the cognitive dissonance that you pick up on is not lost on a lot of people. You were in the room as well in Munich with Marco Rubio. And I think let's just say there's two sides of this Trump brain. There's, or at least a Trump administration brain on this. And Marco Rubio got a standing ovation in that room. There are some people who kind of cynically said, well, the Europeans have Stockholm syndrome themselves. He didn't punch them in the nose, and they were so relieved that they couldn't help just by kind of sort of genuflecting. But I think that's actually unfair because what Rubio did was put in, let's say, nicer terms what the Trump administration is going on about with Europe, and I think. So he didn't sugarcoat what the actual policy is, but then did sort of nod to things that I don't think made Donald Trump happy in hearing. But, we live in North America, but we are a child of Europe. We are united by values and interests and history. These are things that people haven't talked about, especially from this side of the ocean, for a long time. And I think that was important to say, especially at a moment when you go to Europe, it seems like they're gone. They got punched in the nose one too many times. They've said, screw you, we're out of the house, we're moving out, divorce papers are in the mail. There's a reason why the marriage should continue. It is around shared economic interests, shared military interest, shared interest in pushing back against China. And I think if this does show that there is a side of this administration which is kind of clear-eyed about why it's important for Europeans, and it sounds crazy to have to say this, why it's important for America to be friends with Europe, then that should be taken as a win. And it almost felt like, to be able to say that in that tone in Munich, Marco Rubio had to do penance and go and kiss Robert Fico's feet in Bratislava, and then hug. There's a lot to hug there. Viktor Orban in Budapest, and then put out this ridiculous website about dangers to free speech in the one part of the world that actually upholds democratic values as I think as well as the U.S. has, let's say over decades. It's a shame. I mean, I think Viktor Orban will be out of the office, knock on wood, within 2 to 3 months. He is weak. He is disliked. He is corrupt. That is coming back to haunt him. To even say that Hungary is essential to American interests is just nonsense. It's a country of 10 million people, landlocked, that happens to be pro-Russian. So there's the actual interests that reflect a country of 360 million that has so much at stake in Europe and vice versa. And there's the performative aspect of MAGA that almost has to be part of what they do. I will just say one thing about attempts to create little Trump babies in Europe. You can't both hate Europe and try and embrace it the way the Trump people do. And it goes the other way, too. I mean, they tried this in the first Trump term. Steve Bannon did a tour of Europe, went to Italy, tried to make friends. They don't like Americans that much, especially on the far right. The far right in Europe is not pro-American, just like memo to Washington. It happens to be pro-Russian, pro-Chavez. I mean, these are extreme authoritarians, and they don't really, I don't think there's an openness. I mean, there's clearly a stylistic similarity in between AfD in Germany and what Trump is. But on substance, there's actually very little overlap. And I think that speaks to the limitations of any attempts to export the revolution. And by the way, the revolution is pretty troubled here in America. So, it's only going to be, I think, going down this way based on what the politics and the economics are. So I wouldn't, if I was European, I would maybe rethink the whole divorce thing and not be so kind of paranoid about the U.S. Bringing to power the far right. What's going to bring the far to power in Europe, by the way, will be Europeans.
The last point in particular is not unimportant. And Liz, I mean, this cognitive dissonance that Matt started out with, and I think explained so extraordinarily well. On the one hand, a recognition that Europe is pretty darn important economically, militarily, and et cetera. Just as a side note, this entire military operation in Iran depends on the capacity of the United States to use bases in Europe. The FT had a wonderful graph today about all the aircraft that had to land in Europe and in fact are going to be operating out of Europe in order to make this work. An issue for the Brits, who are for right now still denying the use of those air bases in actual strikes, which will be interesting. But then on the other hand, this remarkable sort of attempt to try to undermine the interfering in the domestic politics of other nations, to the point where not just Hungary, but Viktor Orban's survival is seen as a vital national interest, or is declared a vital national interest of the United States, which is, last I looked, I'm not sure that will be the case. How does this happen? This look from Britain's perspective? Of course, Nigel Farage and the Reform movement are part of this effort in some phase, but of course not in other ways. So how do you look at it?
Well, yes, as you say, Europe has a homegrown far-right movement that has been growing and in popularity in the past few years that's totally independent of the Trump administration. And yeah, there's this cognitive dissonance. How Trump thinks he can appeal to Europeans while slapping tariffs on them and criticizing them and attacking them is a mystery. I mean, of course, you've got the common element of being anti-immigration, but that's about it. And these political movements in Europe picked up on the anti-immigration thing before Trump and without Trump. So that's nothing new. There's no benefit to him there. The far right in Britain is a bit different because Nigel Farage is extremely pro-Trump and has extremely good relations with him. He's a real transatlanticist in his way, in his strange way. However, and I think he would discover that being too closely associated with Trump is a burden for him. It will hold him back. I think he has to be really careful not to associate with Trump too much. And that if anything was to unravel him here, it could be too much the close association with Trump, because Trump is not liked in Europe. And I mean, whatever Rubio said, and you were in the room and some people felt inclined to clap, Nobody, and J.D. Vance said the opposite. And another guy says something else. Nobody's going to listen to anything unless Trump says it. And the last thing we heard about Trump talking about Europe was he wanted to occupy Greenland, and everybody's terrified of that. And I think Europeans would be very well advised to keep their quiet divorce plans going and keep talking to the lawyers and draw up the documents and just be ready for when the moment comes, because we are facing a massive new threat from Russia. It's real and growing every day. And if we can't be sure that America would be there to defend, we've got to take steps to mitigate that, potentially without America.
The one thing that most people even though they were relieved in the room when Rubio spoke, it was the absence of Russia as part of the explanation of why it was in the American interest to be there, because Russia right now is the major military threat, geostrategic threat to Europe and to European security. Bobby, last word to you. We're out of time, but I do want to give you your perspective of what do you think is going on in this effort to try to to interfere in domestic politics in a way that is quite alien to the relationship on both sides of the Atlantic.
Like all of you, I'm baffled by that applause for Rubio's speech, because surely the Europeans, as Liz pointed out, surely the Europeans know by now that anything Marco Rubio says, especially about Europe, doesn't count for a big hill of beans in Washington. Giving the right-wing parties and forces in Europe this platform, I take Matt's point that the right wing in Europe is very different from MAGA, much more interested in the views from Moscow than from Washington. And I agree that it won't move the needle a great deal, but it can't hurt. It doesn't hurt any of these movements to have the additional imprimatur of Washington. At least they're able to say, look, while we represent, if you like, the pro-Moscow view, the fact that Washington is not taking the anti-us view gives us a little more credibility, with maybe a very, very tiny sliver of the population. But it is, as we've seen recently all over the world, these small slivers of populations can have an outsized influence when it comes to elections. So will it greatly strengthen these right-wing movements in Europe? Greatly? No. Will it strengthen them? I think it will. The fact that Washington endorses these ideas is not insignificant, even for those who don't like America. What America says and what the posture America adopts in the world is of consequence, does make a difference.
We'll have to leave it here. What a fantastic conversation. Wide range of topics. I can't think of three people to rather have this kind of conversation than Liz Sly, formerly of the Washington Post, Bobby Ghosh, formerly of so many places, Bloomberg and many others, and Matt Kaminski, formerly of Politico, and now the editorial chair in Middle East Broadcasting Network. Terrific insights. Looking forward to having all of you back. And thank you all for listening today. World Review is a Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs podcast brought by the Harvard's Kennedy School. This week's episode, like every episode, is produced by Tectonic Video. I am Ivo Daalder. We'll be back next week with another edition of World Review. Until then, everyone have a wonderful week and weekend. Bye-bye.